Everyone, Crewcaster here, and today I want to share with you my experiences with Blue Protocol, an upcoming MMORPG that holds a lot of promise coming later this year. I recently had the chance to play the Japanese network test for this game, and I had a lot of fun, but that doesn't mean that this game is perfect, as there were a few things that had me worried, or were just a bit off from where I would like them to be. So for today, I want to just give you my thoughts and opinions on what I experienced throughout the test, whether it be good or bad. Let's start off with the story. For this test, we were able to play the first chapter or portion of what will be Blue Protocol's main storyline, and without going into too much detail about it, your character starts off with amnesia, and you don't know who you really are or where you are from. You end up getting thrown into adventuring with this character named Festi, and you go around the different zones to try and discover who you actually are, and eventually learning of this ultimate threat that wants to take over or destroy the world. I would say this is a pretty standard or cliche story so far, but I found it more enjoyable as I played more, and you don't always need to break the molds when it comes to your main storyline. But what I found best about the story was the characters themselves. They're very their own, or individuals, because as you're going along the story, you find more and more, kind of like Genshin Impact or Final Fantasy XIV with its main cast. And all these characters, and yourself included, are all voice acted through the cutscenes, which is like a huge bonus for an MMO like this. And it has its mix of serious and comedic moments, so it's never too much of one or the other.
冗談ではないことなどお分かりでしょう。どうかこの場で選択を。協力しよう。
One thing I do worry about, however, is that they make use of time travel fairly early into the story, and with games or movies that implement that kind of topic, it can be a train wreck waiting to happen. But overall, with the story, I think it has promise to be good, or at least will suffice for many out there. Now let's move into the combat. If you are familiar with Final Fantasy XIV and Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, the combat is essentially the middle ground of both of those games. Or for an even older throwback, it's very close to Dragon Nest. But you get up to 4 skills on your hotbar from your class, which all have their own cooldowns. These can range from doing extra damage, healing, buffs, debuffs, etc. You can also get a 5th skill as an ultimate once you reach level 10, which can do massive damage but has a longer cooldown. One thing that is a bit different though is you can also have 2 summons, or what they call imagines, equipped no matter the class. These you earn from quests as well as crafting them, which we will talk about later, but there's a wide range of different summons which do different abilities, such as placing a healing bubble, giving super armor to your party, or just doing a big attack. I personally love these imagines as it gives access to more abilities that your class otherwise would not have available to you, making up for its shortcomings, or can allow you to double down on their strengths. While you are waiting for all these to come off cooldown though, you'll be using base attacks. One is a normal attack on like the left mouse button, another is a special ability or secondary attack based on your class with the right mouse button. I would say the special ability kind of defines how the class is going to use its resources or how it will even function. You also have the stamina bar, which you use for sprinting, jumping, as well as dodging the enemy attacks. When it comes to the enemies, though, they are actually difficult, even for the mobs just roaming the open world. They typically take quite a few skills to kill, and if you do get hit by one, it usually takes away a 1/4 or more of your health at once. And it only gets worse if you face a boss without some proper backup. But personally, I like this sense of challenge throughout the game, even in the early levels. It feels like you aren't just trying to rush to the end game to get some fun or difficult content like the majority of other MMOs out there do. It kind of reminds me of the Dark Souls series, just not as punishing or unforgiving. Honestly though, it does help you learn each class as you play, trying to fit a certain role or style you enjoy. Speaking of the classes, there are 5 in total. There is the Aegis Fighter, which wields the sword and shield. It kind of plays like a paladin or cleric, where you defend your teammates from harm while also giving them buffs, or debuffing the enemies around you. The fighter can also guard attacks with its shield to block damage up to a certain amount on a gauge on the side. And if you use a normal attack directly after blocking, you can do a counter. Then we have the second class, the Twin Striker, which uses dual axes. This is a melee DPS focused class that gets lifesteal with many of its abilities. This class can also have an extra combo meter, which the more you attack the enemies, the more damage you deal, up to 20% more. Next is the Blast Archer with the bow. This class is interesting as it is a ranged DPS, but also is one of the main healers of the game, as its right click is a shootable AoE heal. The Archer also has access to a lot of utility abilities, making it one of the most adaptable classes in the game. And then there is the Spellcaster with the Rod. This is a mage class that focuses on dealing elemental damage. Elemental damage can be done by all the classes, which builds up on a gauge underneath enemies for special effects. The Spellcaster, though, gets access to 3 elements, can spam their abilities through use of its mana gauge. Most of their skills don't have a cooldown, but use a portion of this gauge which can be recharged with their right click. For the final class, we have the Heavy Smasher with a hammer gun thing. This is another tanky class like the Aegis Fighter, but is the best at grouping and staggering enemies. All of its abilities use bullets from the weapon, which can be reloaded by holding the right mouse button, and you can also use the right click to shoot those bullets one at a time to pull in the enemies. So as you can see, the classes, even though a lot of them are focused on doing damage, are still pretty diverse or different from each other. And even within the same class, they can be different. Each class has 12 tactical skills, which are the 4 that can be put on the hotbars I showed before. You get that 1 ultimate at level 10, 2 base attacks, and 11 passives, which you can select a couple at a time. You gain all of these as you level up with each class and get further improvement on higher level ups. So even within the same class, there'll be a variety of builds since you're so limited in what you can choose. For example, you may see some Aegis fighters built for buffing the entire team, while others may be focused on debuffing the enemies instead. And also what is cool with this class system is they can freely switch to any class just by changing your weapon in town. Do be aware though, each class is leveled separately, so it may take some time to fully use each one. But now let's talk about the bad with these classes, as they were definitely not perfect and could use quite a bit of balance changes. So first off, I played this Twin Striker the most during this network test, got to like level 12 or 13, and it just felt lackluster the entire time. The lifesteal was definitely nice when I needed it, but it just felt like I wasn't even doing as much damage as I was supposed to, even with that combo meter maxed out with the extra 20% damage. And the reason why I felt that way is because when I tried the Blast Archer, the one with the bow, it just felt like right off the bat I was doing more damage at like level 1 using lower equipment. I was just like headshotting the enemies at a range using just like the first skill that is given to you, and I was killing enemies way faster than I was with the Twin Striker. And just to make matters worse about it is that the Archer, like I mentioned before, gets this shootable AoE heal that they can use either on themselves or on other people when necessary. So it kind of just makes the Twin Striker just not feel as good because it has to rely on hitting the enemy for the lifesteal, and it's like not too much on the skills at first. There's a skill later that makes it like way more, but pretty much you're only getting like a few points of health with each skill. And with the Blast Archer, you're getting a lot more with the AoE heal that you can do every like 15 seconds. But then for another example here with the Spellcaster class, it just fundamentally does not feel right, because of how it relies on that mana gauge, and most of the skills don't have a cooldown and just expend a certain amount of that resource. You pretty much just spam the same move over and over again of whatever does the most damage. It doesn't give you any incentive to switch up the skills for like the certain encounter, and it just feels like a lot of the time you're just doing a single thing, or maybe even using normal attacks, because apparently those do more damage than your actual skills. And then for another thing, with all the classes, there were some skills that were exactly the same animation or attack, and the only thing that they did differently from each other was like a little bit of an elemental effect for one, or maybe like a buff or debuff from the other. But I think the thing that hurt the most with these skills were the cooldowns, as you could pretty much use all the skills and you'd be waiting for like 5, 10, 15 seconds for at least one of them to come off, and you'd just be doing normal attacks in between that time. There's a lot of balance issues or nitpicks like these that I feel like they could either fix before the launch of the full game, or it would just fix over the course of you getting further in levels that we just did not have access to. But now let's talk about the gameplay or what you'll be doing in Blue Protocol. So first off, there is the major city of Astralis, which will be your main social hub for the beginning of the game. Here you'll interact with tons of players, like trying to hold hands with them maybe, but also doing your shopping, crafting, and even fishing here. This is where you're also going to get the majority of your quests from. So like the main quest line and the side quests, and with these, they're pretty much the same as like other MMOs. You're going to go out and kill X amount of thing, collect certain things, talk to certain people, etc. So nothing too groundbreaking here, but there will be certain rewards that you would want to grab out of these, like blueprints and, money and experience. But at a certain point, you can't do any more as you need a certain adventure rank. So how do you increase this? Well, you need to focus on what they call adventure boards. These boards have a whole bunch of objectives on them on a track that you complete towards the main goal, which for the bigger ones are increasing your adventure rank, but there's some optional ones that are handed through side quests or in chests, which can give you gear if you complete them as well. And then with each objective, they also give you a smaller reward like money, experience, or even some blueprints and cosmetics. Once you complete a board for ranking up, you still need to complete a trial at the quest counter, kind of like Warframe, where you need to face a boss or a certain encounter. So you'll be focusing on these boards and the quests kind of like at the same time in the open world. But let's kind of talk about the world itself. So there's kind of enemies all over in different zones, which consist of like goblins, boars, kind of a whole bunch of fantasy creatures. And here you can use mounts and also engage in like world bosses or challenge quests. But while doing those, you'll also be harvesting materials kind of dotted throughout, such as rocks, plants, and even seafood. Essentially, everything that you're going to be doing throughout like this game is going to be collecting materials to craft weapons or gear, as they don't really straight up drop from the enemies. And honestly, this crafting system is going to be the make or break for a lot of people with Blue Protocol. There are quite a few reasons why I say this. First off, there is a thing called battle score, which is kind of like an item score where it takes your weapons, imagines/summons, and your gear kind of as an accumulated score to gate you from content like dungeons, raids, and other modes within the game. And with these, they're sometimes in the main storyline, so this leads into reason number 2, which is you won't be able to progress anywhere and be forced to farm specific enemies for rare materials that have like a 1% or less chance to drop for hours and hours, even in the early game. One example of this was for a level 10 weapon. So there's goblins everywhere in the different zones, but we had to go to a certain zone to kill certain goblins for goblin fangs, which were a part of this level 10 weapon, but there was more to it than that as well. Once I had enough fangs, I needed to get a material from a dungeon, which I was trying to get enough battle score for with the weapon. So then I realized, I need to actually backtrack and make different pieces of equipment and not a new weapon. So then that means more material farming, which of course some of those were rare materials, which I needed to spend like a half an hour, several hours to obtain just for a couple pieces. And then I realized, I actually needed to get more battle score from summons as well, as not all summons are created equally. So I needed to make a higher level summon from farming the world bosses and challenge quests to eventually get access to the dungeon to make the better weapon. So what I gathered from all that is that the game is trying to force you down a linear line in terms of your gear. You need to make these certain pieces, you need to have these certain summons, and you need to have this certain weapon to be able to progress in any way. It did seem, however, that as I progressed more in the levels, a few more options were opening up to me, but it just seemed so forced, and having that at the beginning of the game, I feel like will deter a lot of players. So then you might be thinking, well, I'll just skip all that and maybe buy it off another player that's going to do all the work for me. Well, this leads into the third reason. There is no marketplace. There's no player market. You can't buy cosmetics, can't buy gear off of anybody. You can't trade directly with people either. So you pretty much have to do everything on your own, either good or bad. But in all honesty, I think I was going about it the wrong way for the majority of my playtime, as it seemed like the best way to actually get the gear, either crafting or getting it straight up, was by doing the adventure boards, because if you completed the tasks for certain optional ones, you actually got the straight gear pieces, or by completing the objectives, you got the materials to make it. But sometimes the boards had their own problems because some of those objectives also required you to get rare things or required you to do things that had a battle score that was higher than what yours was, so it was impossible to do. Thankfully though, it does seem like the devs are acknowledging the players' feedback. It seems like they'll be adjusting these drops for when the game fully launches or in future betas. Now let's go back to talking about the different types of gameplay. So there's a ton of instance content that kind of complements the open world. So as mentioned before, there are dungeons, which these are 6-man instances that are pretty much like straightforward, like linear lines essentially. So maybe a few branching paths here or there. The first one is insanely easy to do, not too difficult at all. You can pretty much blow through it. But when you get past that first one, every dungeon feels like an actual dungeon. Each enemy is strong, difficult to kill, as well as there's kind of like mini bosses in between leading up to the main boss. And with those main bosses, they have kind of like mechanics to them. The second one has a giant boar, and with it you have to dodge these spots that it shoots out, as well as jump over certain attacks that it does. But then there are also raids in the game, which are 30-man instances. They don't work like traditional MMOs where you go to a certain location to just go do them, like in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, but they work like Phantasy Star Online 2's urgent quests, where they happen over a period of time, so it might take a couple hours for it to show up, and then you enter the instance if you have enough battle score. For the network test, we had a chance to do one of the raids, which is a giant dragon boss, and it is going to destroy you for sure. It throws out a whole bunch of board clears, it shoots out fire, stomps around, you know, the usual dragon stuff. But in turn, you can use these turrets dotted throughout the arena to try to freeze it for a whole bunch of damage. Definitely looking forward to more of these raids. But then there's other modes as well. There's like a Coliseum, which is kind of like a horde mode or arena. There's also like towers, which we didn't really have a chance to do, and like time attacks and more. So right off the bat, when this game launches, we'll have tons of variety in terms of the modes that you can do within the game. But now that we have all of that out of the way, let's take a look at my interpretation of what the gameplay loop will be like. So first off, you'll be going through the main quest as much as you can, but then you'll hit a snag somewhere. Either you'll be under geared, where you need to craft more gear, under leveled to where you have to do side quests or just kind of like level up in general, or you'll need a higher adventure rank, which will lead you to the adventure board. But of course, with all of these, they might run into a snag too. Can't progress the board, like there's some objective that you can't do, maybe you have to craft gear for it. If you can't craft the gear, then you may need to farm materials, or you need to find better recipes through side quests. Then with the materials, you know, with open world or dungeons, sometimes it's too high level, you won't do any damage, so you need to go level up. And this just kind of all combines together, going from one thing to the next throughout the entire game. But of course, when it comes to the end game, this will look different. So no more main quests to do, probably not too many more side quests, and definitely not leveling up anymore, but some optional adventure boards to still do, either for like other pieces of gear, or maybe even some cosmetics, material farming for the best gear in the game, as well as just doing the dungeons and raids for fun if you want to. But ultimately, it's probably going to be focused on cosmetics, so getting currency, or maybe just straight up cosmetics from different activities. But since we're on the topic, what was actually available for customization or cosmetics within the network test, and what will be available for the future? Well, a lot of what we could get was through quests, the adventure boards, or certain like activities, but a lot of it actually was in an exchange shop, which required GC, which was a currency that we could earn through achievements. So each one of these cosmetics cost 200 of this GC, which I feel like won't be the case at launch. It was mainly just to test them, but you can buy certain pieces, so like hats, chest pieces, gloves, boots, pants, all of that for like your outfit, and then you can kind of intermingle between the different parts as well. There are also accessories that you can grab for different parts of your body. Unfortunately, it does look like these are split between female ones and male ones, so there's like a male version of cat ears as well as female version of cat ears. They're not universal. But there's also stamps and like flavor items like firecrackers, mounts, etc. A whole bunch of different things. There's also a couple more shops where you could customize your look even more. So there was a color change one which allowed you to paint your individual pieces of your outfit. It just cost some materials to do so. Then there was also an aesthetic shop, which allows you to change up your character itself, like the hairstyle and all the proportions, all the things like that, even gender. But it looked like it required a special ticket, which I only saw one available through a side quest in the beginning of the game. That's pretty much all the options in the network test itself, but there will be more once the game launches. They mentioned that there will be a cash shop, there'll be a season pass, as well as a gacha system to be able to get more cosmetics. But if you're interested in more of like how the monetization works for Blue Protocol and kind of like more into the cosmetics, I did make a whole video on it, and I'll put a link in the upper right or down below in the description. I think though that covers the majority of what was available to us in this test. There's a couple of miscellaneous social things like a picture mode and customizing your profile, and they hinted at a few more things that will only be available at launch, like teams or alliances. But I think this game already has a lot going for it. Overall, I'm excited for when Blue Protocol will be released and hope that they will fix the majority of the issues mentioned here and improve on what they have so far. I think that what will make or break this game will hinge on them doing so, and of course the end game being good as well. Let me know what you guys think though, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.